All right, everybody, welcome back to our discussion on medieval history for SPCC History of Western Civ. All right, so we're going to be looking at two areas today. First being the economic and cultural revival of the later medieval period, as well as the bubonic plague. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, during the later part of the medieval area, we're going to be seeing some economic expansion. This is going to be basically showing a growth of towns, and trade is going to expand exponentially during this time. This is going to be kind of influenced by the, interaction with the Middle East that happens a lot more during this later period. Now, this is also going to increase agricultural production for these towns and the people living there. So there's going to be more of a surplus of food. You get more population growth, and that's going to lead to expansion of towns and cities and all that goes with it. So as the economy is growing, the feudal classes are put more into an economic squeeze. All right. What this means is the serfs, the people who were barely above slaves that we've talked about, they are starting to get a little bit more spending money, so they're able to buy their freedoms. So that we're starting to see the feudal system declining. With this strict social structure is starting to fade at least a little bit. All right. Now, the growth of towns, the economics is going to play a part here. So these towns are going to grow in wealth as well, which is going to lead them to start wanting to build protective walls so they're less vulnerable, start having more town militias and guards, all that type of stuff. So protection is going up as well to show off with the wealth of the economic growth that's happening. Now, the towns, as you can see with the second bullet, they were nasty. All right. So there was almost no sanitation at all. So like you do your business in a pot in your house, you're just tossing it out the window when you're done. And it's just going to pile up, shall we say. So literally, if you're walking through these medieval towns and cities and stuff, you're literally walking past puddles of urine and piles of poop. So you can imagine the smell. Basically, picture like a music festival near the Porta-Johns. Right? So these conditions are actually going to help more rapidly spread the bubonic plague once we talk about how it comes into Europe. Now, the towns are also going to play a big role in trade, like we said before. Now, this is going to be with the merchants. Merchants are the traders, the people who buy and sell goods for a profit. All right. Now, they form a guild. A guild is like a union now. So it's like a group of people who work together for their particular line of work, and they're going to, keep prices competitive between them. Nobody sells too low so that they run everybody else out of business. So there's a balance between shops, shall we say. Craft guilds are also going to be coming into play. So these are our artisans. These are going to be people like our blacksmiths, our weavers, our thatchers, all that type of stuff. Basically, the jobs that are not people working out in a field or chopping down wood or mining in the ground for minerals. These are the people who make things with those raw goods. Now, so people have all heard of towns with the word burg, like Lynchburg, for example. This is from an old European way of talking about towns. So a town or a burg, so it'd be like the town of Lynch, so Lynchburg. This is how we're going to start seeing a new class of people called burghers. These are people who We're not relying on the land to make a living. So that's going to be more of like your craftsmen, your town politicians whose job are to run the town, especially those people. Now, we're also going to start seeing more of a conflict between the classes and the townspeople who want to run their own day-to-day lives and run the courts and make the laws. So people wanting to start moving away from the nobility being in charge. So this is all happening before the plague strikes. Education during this time and in these towns that are growing in the cities, it is controlled by the church, by the clergy. And so they're the only ones really, and those who are really high up in the nobility who can read and write. And it's typically in Latin at this time. Not a super amount is going to be in any different language like German or French or English, right? So as towns are growing, we need more people being educated for running these towns that are popping up all over the place. So we get a new interest in it. So in 1150, roughly, universities start to be put in place to educate the ruling classes. So this would be like the equivalent of like grade school through middle school. That's the level of education that these people would be working with at these universities. And they would, of course, then be the forefront of what we know of as a university today for the higher levels of education, not just the basics that we get through public education or even, the private schools. All right. Now, these began as a guild of scholars who were organized for learning with rules and the obligations of students and teachers. Now, some church leaders worried that the study of people like Aristotle would threaten Christian teachings, because if you remember from the ancient Greek history, talking about the philosophers and all, Aristotle, he was somebody who promoted asking questions. Why is this happening? Why is this the result? Why is this what happens if I do that? So it's challenging the authority by asking why. The church doesn't really like that, so they're going to put limits on what the people have access to while they're in these school settings. Now, art and literature typically is going to be either church-related or it's going to be the romances. These would be like the stories of King Arthur, for example, where you have the Knights of the Round Table who are doing these great and heroic deeds, saving damsels in distress, killing dragons and other monsters, things like that. Writers are going to be found mostly amongst men, but there would also be women in the convents, so like nuns, the women of the church who would also get to do some of these types of jobs. It typically was not a job that women got doing writing or art of any type where they would even be recognized, even if they were allowed to do it. So typically it was just men, and their literature would start to increase in languages outside of Latin, so they could be accessed by more people. And the two major ones that you would need to know are Dante Alighieri, who is an Italian man. He wrote the Divine Comedy. So the most popular one that you would know would be Dante's Inferno, where he is traveling with a guide, a philosopher. I am not remembering which one it is at the moment, but he's traveling with an ancient Greek philosopher. And I think he's with Plato. He's with Plato, which was a Roman philosopher. And they're going through the 9 levels of hell. So, like, if you had a lesser crime, you might be in the first level. The higher the level, the worse the punishment for the worst sins that you committed during your life. And it's like these very crazy, kind of twisted punishments that he describes in there. And we also, you should know, is Geoffrey Chaucer, his story of Canterbury Tales. Uh, English class, you should be looking at some of those at some point while you're in high school. It's just, these people telling stories, like competing against one another for a prize. And, it's about a knight, a nun, all these different people. All right. Now, churches were built in the Romanesque style. All right. It would tend to evolve into Gothic, like Notre Dame. All right, let's get into the interesting part of the day, the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. All right, so in the 14th century, it's like the 1300s, the bubonic plague decimates the population of a lot of Asia and then a buttload of people in Europe. All right, so as you can see here, it's going to be spreading in Europe basically from Italy and up into everywhere else. All right. So we go from these shaded green areas in 1348 to all of these affected areas that are shaded in the following year. Pretty quickly spreading stuff. All right. And this is just a artist's rendition of the destruction that happened during the Black Death. So you have all the people that are sick. There's also war that's going on and famine along with the plague. All right. So we have a huge decline in population. We're going to have somewhere between 75 and 200 million people dying in Europe from the disease. We don't know exactly. That is the range we have to work with because we don't know what the population even was when this all started. All right. The higher up in Europe, so the further north you went, the less devastating it was, but it still did a lot of damage. As you can see, northern Europe, so think places like England or Denmark or even Germany, a fifth of the people dying. But down to Italy, which was like one of the hardest hit places, 80%, that is a buttload of people. There are more dead people than living. Right? China, since we said this plague started in China, their population decreased by a good 50%, it's estimated, from 125 million down to like 65 million. That's a lot. All right. And of course, the urban areas, the cities are hit the worst. And I'm sure you can guess why. That would be because more people living closer together, those horrible sanitation environments that I talked about before, where there's just excrement laying all about. And there would also be animals like the rats and everything. So with the Black Death, it started out, like the story goes, it started out on fleas that got onto rats. And then the rats got on the ships, like the Italian trade ships from the Middle East, and brought it into Europe, and then the fleas got into the human population, and then it just snowballed from there. The people who caught it, they would get these black lumps that would grow on their bodies, on glands called the buboes. So that's how they get the name bubonic plague, because of the buboes being enlarged, inflamed, pus, all that type of stuff. And it would spread very quickly through, interaction, people like touching and all that. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Ring Around the Rosie actually has its origins with the bubonic plague, because, Ring Around the Rosie, the people would get a little rosy-faced and all that, rosy-cheeked, so red in the face. Pocket Full of Posy, people would have flowers to try and mask the stench, because a posy is a type of flower, if I'm not mistaken. And ashes, we all fall down. That is because then, people the further along they got with the disease, they would get very ash colored, like a sickly white, pale to their skin, and then, all fall down, drop dead. So it's that nursery rhyme, sing along for little kids is actually very dark when you think about it. All right. Now, with all these people that are dying, we're going to see a lot of decreases in the labor force that is available. So the workforces drop down. We're going to see towns and villages being abandoned because there's like nobody left alive in some cases, or there's so few people that need to just move and get out of there. Skilled workers, they had high death rates, especially doctors and priests, because they were the ones interacting with the sick people. All right. Feudalism is going to start to shrink because of this. Nobility getting sick and dying, their lands are up for grab, stuff like that. The labor force, there's less people to work for the nobility. So, serfdom is starting to go away. They are going to have to start paying their laborers a more livable wage. The church, their power is going to decline. It's going to take a pretty big hit. So, like, the Pope is like, he's the guy who talks to God. He has no answers. He can't make it better. So why are we caring what the church says if they're not doing anything for us to help end this, like, travesty that's happening everywhere? Yeah. Trade is going to be disrupted big time, right? The Crusades led to trade happening, but the decline in population once the plague comes in, 100 years or so later, like 150 years basically, fewer people means there's less demand for goods, and there's less people to go around and do the trading of said goods. So it basically cripples the economics and international interactions of Europe during this period, during the 1300s and into the 1400s. It would take a good 100 years for Europe's population to recover and get back to the numbers that it had before the plague. That's pretty bad. So, yeah, we're going to end on that lovely note. All right, so when we come back, we're going to be talking about what's going on with the church, and we're going to be talking about the Mongol invasion of Europe as well.